This is the biggest PC handheld that I've held ever. It's almost a parody of itself. This is the ONEXPLAYER X1. It's really an 11-inch Windows tablet with the option to snap controllers onto the sides. In this configuration, it's exactly as ridiculous and impractical to use as it might look. As a tablet, it's actually pretty nice. It reminds me of my old Microsoft Surface Pro 2 that I used to have, which I loved at the time, but in hindsight, it was the worst laptop that I've ever had. What I like about this ONEXPLAYER X1 is not the name, but it feels really premium. It's got this nice solid metal construction. It comes with this tablet-like keyboard, something that is sorely missed on PC handhelds very frequently. It also comes with this big leathery back piece that magnetizes onto the back, with a hole cut out for its big fan and gamer LEDs. This back piece is a necessity because it acts as the kickstand. Otherwise, this device can't stand on its own. And the kickstand is not the best. It maxes out at about a 45-degree angle. You can't even lay the device down on its back because of the giant intake fan. A kickstand like the new OLED Switch or even like the original Surface Pro would have been nice to see here. But it is kind of nice to have a device that doubles as a laptop-ish device and also a gaming handheld-ish device. I found myself using it mostly as like a tablet laptop hybrid, and it was kind of nice like that. The speakers are abysmal though.
Did you enjoy it? Yeah, I think it's like an 8 out of 10.
They're not that loud, and they sound worse than my 10-year-old iPad.
I will say one thing, I understand why it's like this.
They sent it to me for free to review, and they included this neat little pen that has nowhere to go when I'm not using it and has no pressure sensitivity. So it's like, okay, I don't think you'll be needing the pen add-on. You've got 2 USB 4 ports, 1 USB-A port, 1 micro SD card slot, and 1 Oculink port for plugging in an eGPU. ONEXPLAYER sells their own eGPUs that use that Oculink port, and they offered one to me, but I'm not making a whole separate video on that. I appreciate it. I got too much stuff. You guys give me a lot of stuff. But thank you. I appreciate it, but I don't want to do that. A lot of people like the Oculink port because it has a lot more bandwidth, but I personally am just fine with Thunderbolt 4 because that's a more versatile port. This device came with 1 terabyte of storage, but ONEXPLAYER likes to split their storage into 2 partitions for some reason. I don't hate this because having the partition split for you already would make dual booting a lot easier, and I think Bazzite would make itself at home on this thing. I love Bazzite, but I ended up not putting it on here because I'm a little bit lazy, and also I've been playing a lot of Star Wars Outlaws, and that game pretty much only works on Windows. It's a huge pain in the ass to get it to work on Linux, so I just didn't even bother. It runs an AMD 8840U, which is equivalent to an AMD Z1 Extreme that's in most PC handhelds these days, but with a few AI cores that will never get used. It also has 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM, which is a lot of fast RAM, more RAM than any other handheld I've tested. So all this should make it perform better than any other PC handheld that I've tested, but it doesn't. It performs pretty much right smack dab in the middle of all the PC handhelds that I've tested. Maybe it's got a slight edge, which is really strange. I guess it's just not as optimized as the others. Unfortunately, on top of being a pretty average gaming handheld, it is also very expensive. It is around $1,300, but it's on sale right now for $1,089. I suspect it's just always on sale though. The screen is very cool, and probably a lot of why I like it so much. It's very large. It's 11 inches with a 16:10 aspect ratio, 120 hertz, which is great, and a resolution of 2560 by 1600, which is pretty big. Unfortunately, before and after updating all of the drivers from the AMD Adrenalin website and also the ONEXPLAYER website, there are only 3 resolutions to choose from, and only one of them works right, and that is the native resolution. I'm not sure if I have any footage of this, because it was when I was just kind of messing around trying to play some games. This is really bad, because one of the first things I like to do if a game is really resource heavy, to make it perform better, I like to drop down the resolution, because you don't need all that resolution, and I wasn't able to do this at all. I tried a lot of things until finally I found a random Reddit post suggesting that I go into the driver package that ONEXPLAYER had and I already used, and I click on this random driver and run just that one. I don't know what happened. Maybe the driver executable script missed this one driver? But I guess whatever. Now I have a million more resolutions and my games run a little better. Part of the reason why this was such a problem is because this screen is a native portrait display. It's meant to be put in a tablet that is held horizontally. This isn't really that much of a problem visually, but it will cause some other problems. Like, for example, you're not gonna have variable refresh rate on this thing, and other minor problems like the AMD Adrenalin overlay is broken. I'll get to the performance in a minute, but I really wanna get right to this controller situation, because that's probably what you saw in the thumbnail that made you click on this video. It comes with these two Joy-Con-like controllers that aren't wireless on their own, but the device also comes with this connector thingy. This thingy has a dongle that lives in the back of the thingy, and this dongle can be connected onto the side of the tablet where the USB-A port is. This is how I play most of my games on here. The controller does not have Bluetooth, which I think is a missed opportunity. I do like having a dongle, especially when there's a place to put it when you're done with it. It's nice to not have to sync the device too, but having the option for Bluetooth wouldn't be too hard to implement, and having the dongle sticking out all the time is a little bit annoying. The controller is very clicky, and I do like clicky. The triggers are analog, the thumbsticks are nice and smooth. The left one wasn't smooth at first when I first took it out of the box, but as I used it, it kind of smoothed it out. The D-pad comes with two different configurations, both of which kind of stick out in a weird way, but it feels fine. The controllers do not have gyro in them, but the tablet itself does. So if you want gyro aiming, you have to play in handheld mode, which is just even more ridiculous because now you're out here throwing all this weight around. Now, the whole gimmick is that you can remove these two little rubber pieces on the sides and you can slide the controllers in with a nice thick click, allowing you to play handheld. This is every bit as ridiculous as it looks. The device is very heavy. If you've ever gotten hand cramps holding a Steam Deck or even just a Switch, you have no idea how much worse it could be. Imagine this thing falling on your face. I was gonna do a bit where this falls on my face, but I'm wussing out. Now, the connectors do a good job of holding this big device, but often when you're using a handheld, you might want to hold it with one hand to like look at your phone or just do something else. I feel really uncomfortable holding this with one hand. I am not confident in the rails on here. They do not feel like they could withstand holding this thing with just one hand. Using it like this is completely impractical. Another issue I have with the rails is that there's nowhere to put these little rubber pieces. So when you're using it in handheld mode, you've just got rubber pieces laying around. And they're not that easy to put back in. And on top of all of this, having a controller on here blocks the bottom USB-C port. There's a lot of reasons to make me not want to use this device like this. Luckily, using it in tabletop mode is awesome. I like to sort of lay it on my chest and play with the controller in my lap. Then I have a nice big screen right up against my face. It's cool. Remember that hinged laptop thing I made for the Switch? Well, it turns out it works for this too. Look at that. I just had to make the cable a little longer, and I had to take the magnetic leather back piece off, but it slid right in, and this is how I've been playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This is a pretty sick setup. Playing games on here is a bit weird. You can get a full 30 watts of TDP on here, which is pretty normal, and you can adjust that all the way down to just 4 watts of TDP, which is very, very low if you're not playing a very resource-heavy game. But unfortunately, if you're playing a very resource-heavy game at the full 30 watts, like I did the whole time I was playing this, you're only going to get like an hour and a half of battery life at most. The 3D Mark test only got an average of 3,338, which was disappointing to me considering the 32 gigabytes of RAM this thing has. That puts it just barely below the ROG Ally X, but just barely above the original ROG Ally, which I guess could be considered commendable because it puts it in like second place, but those other two devices are significantly cheaper devices. The ONEXPLAYER X1, love that name, comes with an OSD that has a little icon on the desktop, but that icon doesn't do anything. You have to access it from the taskbar down there. The OSD does not have a telemetry built in. They make you download and install 2 free third-party pieces of software, but they make it easy to integrate, so it's not that big of a deal. Now we can see stuff like FPS, GPU usage, and other info while we're testing out these games. I've been playing a lot of Star Wars Outlaws on various devices. I like it. I know it's not like the best game. I think I just like trashy Star Wars games. At the full resolution, it ran very bad, getting less than 25 frames per second, dipping all the way down to 15 at times. And I actually played a decent amount like this for a while. I just kind of suffered through it, and I didn't mind as much as I thought I would. It wasn't until I unlocked the other resolutions when I started playing it at 1440 by 900. This increased the frame rate to around 45 frames per second, which is more than enough for this game. Her hair looks pretty terrible, but for the most part, everything else looks just fine and runs nice and smooth. This game kind of made me hate the 16 by 10 aspect ratio of this screen. This is notably the same aspect ratio as the Steam Deck. In this game, it zooms in pretty close to the character, making her take up a bit too much space on the screen, so you can't really see that much. It's not really the end of the world. I could change it to 21 by 9, which is what the game defaults to, but that's a little too much letterboxing. I'd rather be able to just see more of the world. It runs about the same on the ROG Ally X. It has less RAM, but the resolution is slightly lower just because of how the math works out. The horizontal resolution is the same, but you're cropping a little bit vertically. But the aspect ratio works better for this particular game. I always like to try Resident Evil 4 on these things. I immediately dropped the resolution down to 1280 by 800. It held pretty good at a solid 80 frames per second, which is a lot more than I was expecting, and it honestly looks pretty good at that low resolution. Then I raised it to 1920 by 1200, which is still a little lower than the native resolution of the screen. It looks great and held at around 60 frames per second, dipping down to 54 when stuff happened on screen. I would probably honestly leave it like this while playing, which is probably the best performance I've seen with this game in particular on a handheld. Don't be taking that as too much of a compliment, though. I think that this particular game is optimized well enough to take advantage of that extra RAM, maybe. Bumping the resolution up to the full native resolution dropped the frames per second down to less than 40, so that's a bit overkill. We won't be playing it like that. Call of Duty surprised me as well. I played Modern Warfare 3 just to keep things consistent. It defaulted to basic quality settings at 100% render resolution for some reason, which got around 45 frames per second. Not great, but not terrible for 100% render resolution because this screen is very pixel dense. The minimum quality setting dropped the render resolution down to 50%, which is still pretty decent for this screen size. And that shot the frame rate up to 125 frames per second, which is insane. Minimum settings is totally fine for me. It looks just fine. I enabled VSync just to cap the FPS, and it ran really good like this. The first map I played was cell shaded, and that confused me a lot and made me think that the minimum settings were bad. But the good news is that the cell shaded map runs really nice. The second map got me just under 120 frames per second, which also is kind of amazing. It ran great. So performance is pretty decent on this thing, but given that extra 32 gigabytes of RAM, I would have expected the performance to be a little bit better because that's more RAM than any of the other PC handhelds that I've tested. Also, ONEXPLAYER is going to have to keep up on drivers with this thing, and I don't really trust them to do that because they fucked up the resolutions on their graphic drivers so much. What was that all about? Also, let's keep in mind that the other PC handhelds that this thing is up against perform similarly, and they're way cheaper. But despite all of that, I've actually been enjoying it. I've actually been liking it a lot because of the versatility that the tablet provides. My current favorite PC handheld is still the ROG Ally X. Before that, it was the original ROG Ally. But even though that was my favorite, I still found myself using the Lenovo Legion Go a lot, maybe even more than the ROG Ally. And the reason why I think that is because the screen is just way bigger. It's just really nice to be able to see what I'm doing, especially if what I'm doing requires the Windows desktop. I even recently brought my Lenovo Legion Go to a friend's house because I needed to bring a PC and didn't feel like bringing my whole laptop. The inclusion of a low-profile full QWERTY keyboard on the ONEXPLAYER also makes the Windows experience way more palatable. even with all of its shortcomings, I've kind of had a lot of fun with it. It's just really hard to recommend because it's a little expensive, the gimmick that it has is a little stupid, and it doesn't run games much better than other similar devices that are way cheaper. I can see somebody wanting this if maybe they want a small laptop-like device that can play games really well. This thing can also dock to an eGPU, so you can use it like a desktop if you want. But if you want all that stuff, you're probably gonna have a much better time on just a regular old laptop. And some of those can be around the same price and have even better performance than this. While connecting the controllers to the side of the device is dumb, I do appreciate that it came with the controllers, because the controllers are really nice. And I don't think I would have considered this device at all if they didn't include those controllers. I wouldn't have even thought to mess around with it, so I get it. But maybe this concept needs a little longer to bake in the oven. There is a mini version of this device. It has the exact same internals, and it's, I think, the same exact price. And that's got an 8.8-inch screen. But at that point, you're getting into Lenovo Legion Go territory, and you might as well just get that. So what do you guys think about the ONEXPLAYER X1? Are you just jonesing for a tablet that you can grip and game like this? Oh God, it doesn't feel safe. Leave in the comments below, add me on Twitter, any and all of this other social media garbage. Hey, if you're interested in the desk mat that you've seen throughout this video, or maybe this shirt that I'm wearing right now that is glow in the dark, wouldn't you believe it? There's a link that probably just popped up, and there's also links below this video where you can buy them as Wulff Den merch. Enjoy. Subscribe for more wild and wacky videos. We're ramping up to the holidays. There's gonna be a billion videos on a whole lot of different stuff like this. I'm also over on twitch.tv/WulffDen, messing around with this stuff live. Thank you very much. Have yourselves a very good week.